Hello all, it's Miss Apps here. Whilst we are away from school and setting you work remotely, myself and Mr. Vaughan will be creating summary videos of the content that you have covered. This week, the topic of your reading and essay, Elizabeth I and her Parliaments. My aim for the video is simple. I will recap the key learning you should have taken away about Elizabeth and her Parliaments. Hopefully you will find this consolidates your understanding. I will also talk you through how I would approach thinking about planning an essay upon Parliament. You might wish to just listen, you might wish to take notes. This is wholly up to you. So to begin with, what was a Parliament and why was it called? Firstly, it's important to note that Parliament as we know it today was not like Parliament as Elizabeth I would have known it at all. Today we have a constitutional monarch, Elizabeth II, with very limited powers. Parliament is central, therefore, to the running of our country. In comparison, however, in Elizabeth I's time, it was Elizabeth who was central to government. It was she who had the final say in all things. Elizabeth also did not always need to use Parliament. Throughout her reign, for example, she let her policies be known via 382 royal proclamations. Parliament was called rarely, not regularly. It was, though, called to grant the Crown extraordinary income. Extraordinary income was money on top of her ordinary income that would have been gotten from things like rents from the Crown estates. Her extraordinary income was money gotten through taxes and subsidies which had to be agreed by Parliament and could only be collected in times of war or crisis. Parliament was also used to create legislation, a fancy word for laws. It could be called to make the decisions of the Crown into law. Elizabeth's father had used Parliament this way regularly to create the laws that allowed him to divorce Catherine of Aragon and to break with Rome, for example, in the 1530s. Similarly to her father, Elizabeth called a Parliament at the start of her reign to hash out the religious settlement. She also called sessions to discuss her decision to execute Mary Queen of Scots, and regularly from 1588 onwards called sessions to gain the subsidies that she would need to fight the war against the Spanish. So in all this, what was Elizabeth's attitude towards Parliament? We can certainly say that she called parliaments rarely, and in comparison to her father, the use of Parliament was in decline during her reign. Across her 45-year reign, Parliament only met 13 times, with sessions lasting only 126 weeks in total. Yet in terms of the political thinking of the time, this was not necessarily seen as unusual. The frequent parliaments of her father's reign had been seen as symptomatic of instability. Elizabeth herself saw Parliament as a necessary evil, and like Sir Thomas Smith in his book The Republic of England, published in Latin in 1580, she believed, like him, that short and infrequent sessions were the best way to maintain a peaceful kingdom. Short sessions limited the abilities of her MPs to provide too much unwarranted and unwanted advice. It also stopped them being able to air too many grievances or critique her too much. Elizabeth herself only believed that Parliament should be freely able to discuss social and economic issues, as well as any local problems. She rejected Parliament's ability to discuss issues which she saw as part of her prerogative. That meant any mention of marriage, the succession, religious reform, or too strong a push to steer her foreign policy were completely off the table. Discussion of these issues could lead to Parliament being dissolved or prorogued, proroguing being the process of the Queen deciding to dissolve Parliament early. Alongside the proroguing of Parliament when things got out of hand, Elizabeth also had a number of weapons in her arsenal to help her control Parliament. Firstly, the Lord Keeper of Parliament and the Speakers were often appointed by the Queen and her Privy Council. Furthermore, men such as Sir Francis Knowles and later Sir Christopher Hatton helped Elizabeth control MPs. Furthermore, Elizabeth's right-hand man, Sir William Cecil, was an MP himself until 1571, and he then went on to influence a group of MPs known as the Men of Business. His son Robert Cecil, in the latter years of Elizabeth's reign, would hold 31 MPs in his pocket via his patronage, and 6 MPs were his own personal staff, working as secretaries, etc. This, though, did not always work to Elizabeth's favour. Privy councillors could use their connections to force Elizabeth to face up to issues that she had avoided in Privy Council meetings by bringing them up in Parliament. They could bring up issues such as marriage by steering MPs to debate such topics during the sessions. This alongside the fact that by the 1590s, nearly 54% of MPs had not only attended Oxford or Cambridge, but were also legally trained via the Inns of Court, created the foundation for Sir John Neale's traditional interpretation that the relationship between Elizabeth and her parliaments was one of conflict. This has, though, been refuted recently. Sir Geoffrey Elton argued that Elizabeth and her MPs had shared overall aims, yet faced some disagreement in how to achieve them. More recently, the Tudor historian John Guy has stated that he believes the relationship between Elizabeth and her MPs was less of conflict or opposition and more just of frustration on both sides. We have so much evidence and so much knowledge of the Elizabethan parliaments, yet as you can see, they are still hotly debated. This is the nature of the academic process of history, and why questions surrounding Elizabeth and her relationship with Parliament are popular with our exam board OCR. This should make you feel confident. There is no right or wrong answer when it comes to Elizabeth's relationship with Parliament. You just have to think about how you could use the evidence that you have read and summarised in your notes to create an argument that is strong when writing your essay. So, let us imagine what our exam board might ask us. Let's take the 20-mark essays I placed into your pack. These were: assess the efficiency of Elizabeth's dealings with Parliament. Number 2, how far do you agree that Parliament mostly cooperated with Elizabeth I? Explain your answer. This was a genuine past paper question. And number 3, how effective was Parliament in its opposition to Elizabeth? All of these questions ask you to look at Elizabeth's relationship with Parliament. However, each question approaches it in slightly different ways. Let's take the second question from the pack. How far do you agree that Parliament mostly cooperated with Elizabeth I? Now, there are 2 ways we could approach this question in our planning. Firstly, we could take evidence of conflict and evidence of cooperation. If we only do that, though, we might fall into the trap of writing a list-like narrative essay. Even better if we draw out themes. Did we see cooperation or conflict with religion, with marriage, with taxation and warfare? I'm now going to go through these areas, drawing out the evidence of conflict and cooperation that could make up these paragraphs. So, let us imagine what our exam board might ask us. Let's take the 20-mark essays I placed into your pack. These were: assess the efficiency of Elizabeth's dealings with Parliament. Number 2, how far do you agree that Parliament mostly cooperated with Elizabeth I? Explain your answer. This was a genuine past paper question. And number 3, how effective was Parliament in its opposition to Elizabeth? All of these questions ask you to look at Elizabeth's relationship with Parliament. However, each question approaches it in slightly different ways. Let's take the second question from the pack. How far do you agree that Parliament mostly cooperated with Elizabeth I? Now, there are 2 ways we could approach this question in our planning. Firstly, we could take evidence of conflict and evidence of cooperation. If we only do that, though, we might fall into the trap of writing a list-like narrative essay. Even better if we draw out themes. Did we see cooperation or conflict with religion, with marriage, with taxation and warfare? I'm now going to go through these areas, drawing out the evidence of conflict and cooperation that could make up these paragraphs. In a way about Elizabeth and her parliaments. Hopefully you will find this consolidates your understanding. I will also talk you through how I would approach thinking about planning an essay upon Parliament. You might wish to just listen, you might wish to take notes. This is wholly up to you. Hello all, it's Miss Apps here. Whilst we are away from school and setting you work remotely, myself and Mr. Vaughan will be creating summary videos of the content that you have covered. This week, the topic of your reading and essay, Elizabeth I and